Hello there, friends. Welcome to another episode of Weekly Bible Study. It was nice.
We're all shot it with our finger guns. Pew pew.
There you go. So we are Scott,
Bob,
Tyson.
and we are at First Christian Church, campus pastors, lead pastor.
Lead.
Spelled the same as lead.
We could take the chemical symbol PB, just call you the PB pastor. Ha ha ha.
Wow.
Never mind. That's a nerdy thing to say.
We're off to a great start.
Nice.
So we're in Exodus chapter 22, and we'll get there in a second. But first, we have to have a little mixer, frivolity
Yeah.
at the beginning. What was your favorite part of episode? What's that thing? Eclipse Day.
Eclipse Day.
I was thinking.
Those beautiful clouds that were over our heads.
They were beautiful.
And the rain droplets that fell on my head. Yes.
Yeah, they produce life.
They do, yeah.
Well, I went all the way to Arkansas, and I watched the sun turn black.
Wow.
You did.
Yeah, it was pretty spectacular.
That's what we heard.
Yeah, my family, we're eclipse nerds, and so we went all that. I think it was 12 hours we drove. So it was good. It was good.
I have a picture of the eclipse right here over the church building. It was really great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice.
Tommy
Yeah.
photoshopped
Tommy.
it. You can't see it from there.
Focus in there. Yeah. That's Afton campus pastor Tommy Staggs.
Yeah.
Bringing the eclipse to East Tennessee.
The clouds opened up perfectly just to
That is some
reveal-
high
For, like,
quality photography right there.
3 nanoseconds, and he got it. It was amazing.
All right. Lovely.
Really amazing.
And of course, I loved seeing our student director and our worship director with their funny hats trying to bring in on the
Okay,
eclipse.
we've got time for that too. Let's do that one real quick.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
people want to see it.
It's nice there.
People want to see it.
I didn't know if
hear
the aliens were going to come with those hats on or something. I didn't-
Well, we have the aliens right here. They did.
They did, yes.
And there they are.
there.
That's them
That's them.
for sure.
That's the aliens.
The aliens. They have invaded already.
Yeah. They are, okay, that's special. So we're in civil laws still, and some interesting stuff that, you're going through the passage, it's like, wow, feels far off from our world today.
Sure.
And yet, most of what we take for granted and understand as foundational about our common law legal system, doing okay over there, Wes? Most of what we take for granted in our English common law legal system uses a lot of these concepts.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and read real quick.
All right. Can I read?
You can. Exodus 21,
All right.
22, 1 through 15.
All right. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether it is an ox or a donkey or sheep, he shall pay double. If a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed over, or lets his beast loose, and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best in his own field and of his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns so that the stacked grain or the standing grain or the field is consumed, he who started the fire shall make full restitution. If a man gives to his neighbor money or goods to keep safe, and it is stolen from the man's house, then if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house shall come near to God to show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is for an ox, for a donkey, for a sheep, for a cloak, or for any kind of lost thing of which one says, "This is it," the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. If a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep safe, and it dies or is injured or is driven away without anyone seeing it, an oath by the Lord shall be between them both to see whether or not he has put his hand to the neighbor's property. The owner shall accept the oath, and he shall not make restitution. But if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it is torn by beasts, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has been torn. If a man borrows anything of his neighbor, and it is injured or dies, the owner not being with it, he shall make full restitution. And if the owner was with it, he shall not make restitution. If it was hired, it came for its hiring fee. He clearly paid the insurance, the extra insurance when he hired it out.
Nice. All righty. Let's talk context a little bit. Why the civil laws? Why is God giving the people of Israel these particular laws? And let's say civil, not necessarily the Ten Commandments, though these civil laws all come from the Ten Commandments in terms of the principles underneath them. In this case, the 8th, is that right? You shall not steal? 8? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why civil laws from basically chapter, let's say 21 through 24?
Yeah, Bob.
It's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah. Why is he giving them these?
I think it's because he's telling them how they're going to be his people, how they're going to honor him, how the people are going to honor God by their interactions.
And it goes to the word consecrate is repeated throughout our passages that we've been studying. And so that means to be set apart. They're there to be different from the rest of all the other nations. And the other nations had laws and things, but it almost, if we use our terminology, it's taken it a step higher than what everyone else was doing.
Yeah.
It's going above and beyond.
You both said things that fit with our memory verses in 19, 4 through 6a.
Right.
You shall be my treasured possession among all peoples.
Yep.
You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Set apartness, consecration, living as that among all the other nations. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not terribly clear here, but in other parts of the law, it is clear where he says, like, don't be like the other people. Don't be like those who are in the land already, or I'll remove you just like I did them.
And I think there are a couple things, even in our passage here, that are similar and parallel to the idea that the Israelites will functionally be different than the rest, because all of these laws that we're reading about have parallels in the wider world, Hammurabi Code, ancient Near Eastern Mesopotamian law codes, and yet a tweak that's very different, like image of God, for example, things like that. I also think that these are a form of justice that would be relatively radical in comparison to, well, just about every other government on the planet at the time.
And really, you can't, and I think we've said this in past episodes, you really can't take the laws of the day and put them side by side and compare them, apples for apples, really. I mean, they're similar, but there's some similarities, but it's radical. I like that word that you just said.
By law of the day, you mean the law of this day, like
the law of, like Hammurabi Code.
Okay, the law
ancient
of their
Near Eastern,
Ancient. The ancient world of the day would say one thing, but God says, no, I'm taking it further. I'm taking it higher. I'm taking it,
Yeah.
So I think the Israelites, if I use my imagination, when they heard these things, they was like, yeah, but this is not what we're used. This is not our custom. This is not what we're used to doing. But God says, no, that's not. I don't want you to be that way. I want you to be set apart, totally different from the rest of the world.
Yeah. So. One big example of what you're saying, the Code of Hammurabi. So we've already read here that he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox, or 4 sheep.
Yeah, that's verse 1. Yeah.
If you go look at the Code of Hammurabi, if you stole something from the state, something that was state-owned, then you had to pay back 30 times. And if you couldn't pay it back, you would die. So basically, it was like thieves are probably being executed constantly. They can't pay, they're poor already, right? A lot of them. And so then you steal that, you can't pay it back, you're dead.
And there was
So God is introducing some protection for some of these thieves because
There would have
of the
been
image
a
of God.
lot of them, like you said. Scholars estimate that in some of the Greco-Roman times, as many as 3/4 to 80% of people in the world were in some form of indentured servitude.
Yeah.
And there was a class structure in the ancient world that you don't see in this.
Right.
Everybody's on the same plane.
Yes.
The ancient laws not only was like you said the state, but it also had the aristocrat, the rich people. There were laws that were protected them that the normal citizen. They couldn't enjoy those.
Right.
And to make your point, here in verse 1, you were talking about the restitution being 30-fold when you're paying back the government, the state, the church, wealthy people, etc. And private citizens being included at all in the Hammurabi Code for that kind of thing was a bit of an exception in the first place. And the private citizen was paid back tenfold.
Right.
So there was obviously a distinction there. And yet what we've just read here has nothing to do with who it is.
No.
Right.
It's 5 or 4.
Everyone is equal.
Everyone is made in God's image, and that's part of the radical thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
So even though that's all true and good, that's a little not as much about the specific themes in our text today, in the sense that they're all about property and stealing and negligence with caring for somebody else's stuff so it's lost or stolen. So verses 1 to 4 are livestock, 5 and 6 are land, and 7 through 15 are all personal property. And so we've just talked about verse 1, stealing an ox or a sheep. If the person who steals it, kills it, or sells it, they would pay 5 for an oxen, 4 for a sheep. We're not told why the difference, and who knows why. Sheep they wander, and they're probably easier to catch. And oxen probably, for an agricultural world, you get more out of them than you do sheep in some ways.
Yeah, I saw one commentator talking about how oxen would have been trained. They would have been like you've got to train, kind of like breaking a horse, you know. I'm going to show my ignorance here for anyone who actually knows this.
So keep going.
Okay, so keep going.
Yeah, please do.
Just like you've got to train and break and train a horse, you've got to break and train oxen to do what you want them to do. So then you're losing that value too. It's not just the beast, but the beast of burden.
And from what I can tell, you don't really train sheep.
Probably not.
You just kind of keep them from
They're dumb.
wandering off.
Yes.
Yeah. In this verse, evil intent is obvious. And I point that out because there's going to be some verses later on where it's like, it's not totally obvious, so what do we do? Second verse. And verses, 2, 3, and 4 are all clarifications deriving from that first verse's principle. We know that because of the Hebrew for the words if. In verse 1, the word if is the major circumstance. Yeah, and then the other ifs are different ifs, less important ifs. Okay, so verse 2, if a thief is found breaking in and is struck so he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him.
So yeah, that's a protection for, if I understand right, it's protection for self-defense, right?
Yeah, homeowner, it's nighttime, self-defense, the thief breaks in.
The thief gets killed.
And the thief gets killed. There's no blood guilt. And blood guilt means the payment for that blood having been shed.
Right.
There's no guilt for that as it relates to that.
And of course,
that killing or the thief, however you want to phrase that. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is the law of Tennessee. So this would sound familiar to anyone paying attention who's local anyway.
Yeah.
You're probably watching in California, so I don't know about
We
California.
have throngs of people all over the world.
Yeah.
Tyson.
Maybe Oregon. Yeah.
By throngs, I mean
Spain.
a couple dozen, maybe a couple dozen. However, verse 3, a variation
This
on
gets
that theme.
interesting.
This one's a
3.
bit of a different, tough one. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. There wasn't, now there is. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, if the thief has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. So it occurs in the daytime. Presumably at nighttime, self-defense. Part of the assumption might be the thief is willing to kill. Not always.
Yeah, there's no way for the homeowner to tell.
Exactly. That's yes. That's the wonky, difficult part of it that I think is assumed there. So in the sun rising, what's the difference there?
I can see that the thief does not have a weapon in their hand. I can see that the thief is, a little scrawny guy, so I can just,
It's good. Oh, this is Bob.
throw him out of my-
It's fine.
yeah.
Yeah. I didn't really mean to follow up scrawny guy with your name,
Right.
other than the fact that he said that before.
I'm not offended at all, Scott.
All right, move on.
When he first started saying something, I was like, I'm going to say something about Bob.
And then he puts scrawny in there. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, but I think that makes sense. That in the daytime you're able to see intent. You're able to see the context of what's happening.
Hopefully, theoretically, yes.
And then there's also the you have people around you that can, like, you can. They didn't have 911 then, but there's a system where it's in the daytime and you can get round the thief up in a proper way and take them to the authorities, maybe, instead of it might be harder at night to do that. I'm guessing
the thief is found.
Yeah, he's
in verse
found.
2.
That's
we
right.
know that much, whether it's at nighttime or daytime. So the thief has been found when the sun was risen.
Yeah.
To make your point, yeah. I'm not sure about the 911 thing. I'm not sure what commentator you got that from.
There's this funny video.
Bob commentary. The scrawny Bob commentary.
So this kind of reminds me of this funny video I saw where this person's sitting in their car, and obviously their windows are tinted to the point to where you cannot see in. So they're sitting in their driver's side car. They turn the camera on because someone's trying to break into their car, like right next to them. And so the person can't see them, and they're jimmying the lock or whatever. And then the door opens, and all the person does is say, "Excuse me," and the thief slams the door and then walks off, like they didn't do anything. The fact that they realized someone was there. Their intent was just to steal, not to harm the driver, and they walked off right away.
Yeah.
And so in this case,
Which doesn't say, oh, being a thief is okay and good.
Right.
so let me push it to the extreme to illustrate my point.
Yeah.
Let's say that driver got out and harmed that thief who was trying to get away because they didn't intend to do anything beyond stealing. Right.
Yes.
Then that person is liable.
And that's the other side of making full restitution. You can't do that and should not do that. It's not just to do that, given that you know that it's not self-defense.
Yeah.
So it's the other side of all of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting stuff. Good stuff. Verse 4 says, if the beast is found alive, the stolen beast, found alive in his possession, in the possession of the thief, that is found, still found, whether it's an ox or a donkey or sheep, he shall pay double.
And I like this because it's not just return what you stole and then you're done. Right. No, you have to return that and then pay double.
Because there was loss for time.
The time, yep. And the work that was lost.
Yes.
And it affected the economy of that person who owned that.
I'm glad you said, because the next thing I was going to say is, and what we're talking about in an agricultural world, whether we're talking about livestock, land, or personal property, possessions, valuables, I think of it as loot, just because I want another L. Livestock, land, and loot.
That's good.
That's their livelihood.
That does my heart good that you alliterated that, Scott. Woo!
In case you're not aware,
Hallelujah.
Bob loves alliteration a little bit too much. So
Too much.
that was what they lived on.
Right.
And it's obviously important for their livelihood to have that there to
And in
grow things.
many cases, you didn't have a backup ox, maybe. That one ox is all you had to produce food or whatever,
Right.
So that was your livelihood, and it was stolen from you for however long, days, weeks, maybe, and then they finally found it.
Which could put someone's life literally in jeopardy.
Yeah. And so there, it makes sense in that culture, and I still think it even in today's culture, but there it really meant a lot. It had to pay double. It's not just returning that thing that you stole or that animal that you stole.
Yeah.
It's,
Verse 5 says, if a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed over, lets the beast loose, feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best in his own and in his own vineyard, his own field and vineyard. So if the negligence of someone allows the beast to graze over and destroy a field or something like that, if the field is destroyed by one person's negligent of letting the animal run free, then you make restitution by giving the best of your own. What's interesting, I think, here, and it's implicated a little bit in the previous one, the smidge. Negligence, I think, comes out a little more here as the problem, which is to say, theft is obviously wrong and bad. But according to this, there's a sense in which negligence, wittingly, knowingly doing something that harms somebody else's stuff, livelihood, property, is a form of theft in that sense. Yeah. So negligence is introduced here. Verse 6 is similar. But in this one, the negligence isn't necessarily known as a willful evil intent. So the repayment involves the value of what was lost, but not more. So it's like restitution for what was lost, but not double, or something like that.
I would push back against that a little bit and say, since he's saying restitution from the best in his field and his own vineyard, like, I don't know that you would define that as double, but it's definitely more value.
Right.
If I could sell that and get more money than the boring mediocre section of my field.
True, except that we're on verse 6.
Oh,
but I didn't read it. Sorry.
Well, I assumed that best of his field applied to verse 6 too. Maybe I'm wrong.
It might. Sure.
All right.
I don't see why it
might.
Well, wouldn't necessarily.
Either way, the generosity is expected with the restitution.
Yeah. When it says the fire breaks out in catches and thorns, I think it's important to understand that the catches and thorns phrase, thorns often being used as fuel for fire. So like it gets out of control quickly and easily.
Is that like with the brush?
Yeah.
And it's
so
like spreading like.
Yeah. And so the negligence, whether it's arson that's intentional or it's not, it's just negligence. Lighting a fire that rages out of control and destroys others requires full restitution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see, 7 and 8 here. This gets at the valuables being taken care of by somebody because you give them, a man gives his neighbor money or goods to keep safe. This gets complicated. Track with us just a bit here. Let's make sure we jump into some applications soon because we're, surprise, surprise, not to the end quite yet. A man gives his neighbor money or valuables, and it's stolen from the neighbor's house. If the thief is found, the thief pays double. But if the thief is not found, the owner of the house comes near to God, which is basically a Hebrew way of saying before the judges, before the council, because they represent God and God's wisdom being applied in this circumstance. The owner of the house comes near to God to show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. So the one who is taking care of the goods becomes a suspect in that sense because maybe they did something with the valuables and some, pretend thief, this neighbor who's supposed to take care of my stuff, they are a suspect. Not necessarily guilty, but they have to go before the judges.
Sure.
Which I think is, as we alluded to earlier on, is a bit of an innocent till proven guilty kind of scenario, which is pretty good way to talk about all that and just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Anything else there?
And then when you get to, I don't know if we're jumping to verse 9 yet.
Yeah, go for it.
But when you're in that situation where you really don't know who the thief is, and somebody says, "Well, this is it. It has to be this person because this and this and this and this." Well, you still have to come before God, even though if you're in your mind, you might be convinced that this is who it is and this is how it happened.
It still has to go through that
You
process.
still have to go through that process and let God do that because it's still unknown. You're making assumptions. They may be logical assumptions, but you still have to go through that process. And if all the things that we've been talking about, this one kind of hits home to me personally because I'm quick to jump to conclusions. And I say, well, that person's doing this, and I forget to take it before God, right? I've never had my cloak stolen or stuff like that. But when there's
a breach of trust
a
or
breach of trust or some injustice or something wrong
Yeah.
towards me, I automatically jump to conclusions.
Oh, totally. I like
And-
if it's a justice situation, I'm like,
Yeah,
instant.
and I'm full of justice. I mean, I want justice to be done.
yeah.
And instead of me going to before God and saying, "God, you take care of this," you
Well-
be the judge, or go before people who can make that counsel and give advice and say, "This is probably what needs to be done. X, Y, and Z needs to be done." No, I want to take it in my hand and say, "This is it. This is it."
No, that's a good application of all this, especially since in this case, both of the claimants here, both of the people are suspects in that sense, potentially guilty until they go through the process, which I think also helps curb false accusations somewhat. Yeah.
One thought I had while I was reading this, meditating on it, was this is really law for that person who, let's say, you are asking me to protect $50,
Yeah.
and it gets stolen. This doesn't say that I can't just be generous and say, "Hey, it was stolen, but here's $50 of my own money back." Or I don't even have to
Yes.
say it was stolen. I can just say, "Here's your $50," and absorb that cost, being generous.
I was thinking about that the last couple of times we've done some civil law stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about it as if it had to go through that process.
Right.
But theoretically, hopefully, they were just doing it,
Right.
like you just said.
But if I'm unwilling to absorb that cost, which it was, the break-in happened into my house, it was really stolen from me.
Right.
But if I refuse to absorb that on your behalf, then we got to go through this.
Yeah.
All right.
Because I might be the thief.
All right. That insistence on like what I was saying earlier, like this is it, but you don't know, so you got to go through the process because of your unwillingness to be generous. And
13 through 15. If the thing we're talking about is torn by beasts, which is sort of feels like, what? Huh? How did we get from valuables to something torn by beasts?
What's the modern insurance industry call it? Act of God.
An act of God.
Act of
Yeah. That comes from the Hammurabi Code.
This is kind of like an act of God thing. Maybe. Never mind. What were you saying?
Maybe.
Go ahead.
Sure, maybe.
well, it's definitely saying that it's out of your control, out of your
Yes.
you
Yes.
Yeah.
Because a predatory animal.
right.
Yeah. That's a
You're
good connection. That's good.
Thanks, Bob.
I'm here to help,
I was thinking, I'm not sure where that phrase shows up there, but
but we got it. We
it's good.
we lassoed that sucker, and
So, principles involved here. Stealing is bad and wrong.
right.
Personal property is the actual thing.
I think
And when you're helping care for somebody's, you should steward that as if it's yours in a way that does integrity by it. Negligence is a piece of wondering in that process of judicial, finding out if there was intent,
intent.
and intent matters.
And there's still consequences, even if
Yes.
even if you didn't intend for something bad to happen. There's still consequences.
Yeah, what's that tell us about laws and how they relate to the gospel and to Christ?
I think Might be a stretch, but I think so many people think, well, I'm not a sinner. I don't do these bad things, intentionally go out and murder somebody or steal something. But
there's still consequences to that.
Consequences to any small sin, or anything that we do. There's still consequences to that. And even if you didn't have an intent to actually harm somebody, you still did that because you're a broken person affected by sin. That still happened because of that. And
Restitution still needs to be made in some sense.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That gets at something I've been interested in seeing a lot with the laws, which is and I think that there's a sense in which, though not quite, this passage is about the end of the restitution talk, ish. And the word restitution, at least in the sense that we've been looking at it, is not used until Leviticus later on. And so there's all this emphasis on restitution and paying back what was lost, stolen, paying back the loss. But as you implied there is no paying back in a sense. You can't actually repay to go back to the way things were, whether you're talking about the animal you had,
Right.
or someone who was killed who you love.
Yeah.
So these laws point to our human limits, the limit of the law to save, given that we are obviously sinners,
Right.
and that we live in a world that's actually broken, that requires more.
Right.
Yeah.
We wouldn't need these if there wasn't a broken world.
That's right.
They testify to the brokenness of the world.
Yeah. There are three basic uses of the law. They're a teacher for what is good and right. It tells us about the character and nature of God, and it's a restraint of sin and evil. And all of those are pointing to our need for a Savior. So it's so interesting to me how even like these crazy laws about making restitution, theft,
Yeah.
negligence, etc. Like even that points us to the fact that we live in live in a world of sin, and laws can only do so much, and we need more.
And it's these underlying spiritual truths that we're digging out right now
Yep.
that the psalmist is alluding to when he says, "Oh, how I love the law. I meditate on it day and night." It's not because he cares about the rules and how to restore a lost oxen, but because he cares about understanding God's heart.
Right. He knows the nature of the law and what its intent is.
Yeah.
And in that he sees God's glory in it. Right.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Join us next time where we talk about laws.
See ya.
See you.